Welcome to episode 318 of the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Bet365, the largest betting platform globally. You can open an account at Bet365 and use the promo code DAILY365 to bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. You've got obviously Major League Baseball. Yeah, if you're looking at, hey, maybe you're suddenly into the Euro Cup or the Copa Americas, where Canada is taking on Argentina in a semifinal. A little bit of a surprise for the Canadians as we welcome in Frank Saravalli. Frank, well, we haven't spoke since Independence Day, free agency, even Canada Day. So happy belated for all those who celebrate. We'll get to free agency in a second. How was your holiday?
It was good. Pretty standard U.S. 4th of July. Burgers, dogs, little time at the beach. Hang out with the kids, a little wiffle ball game in the driveway, plenty of cold cocktails. It was good.
What's the construction happening? Oh, you're at their cabin, aren't you?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a fence going in today. There's a gas line going in. It's like chaos here. So trying to work around it. And if you hear some banging or some cutting, you know what's going on.
So you're not the foreman though, are you?
No, I would say the GC, the overseer. The guy that makes it all happen.
The general contractor.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's good. Got back after all the travel, Frank. I got back into to training, and I don't know if you ever Tyler.
Hold on a second. After all the travel.
Well, I was working lots with. I didn't travel as much as you, but I had.
You went to one game.
Selling our family farm. So traveling to the farm, all that stuff.
And how far is that from your house?
Yeah, about an hour, 45 minutes. Yeah, probably close to 55.
Oh, so that is a lot of driving.
Yeah. So you're going there all the time and everything's getting ready to sell. So plus the playoffs. And so it's been a busy few months where it kind of fell off the rails a little bit. So no sugar for the month because honestly, I think my sugar habit in the press box took a real beating here for the last 2 months. It's like they just put out bags and bags of candy. Like it's everywhere you go, you can't get away from it. Like it's, and I have no discipline for sweet tooth. So anyway, that and training. And so basically today I feel like I'm a geriatric. Like if you had to see me try to get off the couch, or get off the chair, it's every glute and leg muscle from doing and I didn't even try to go hard. I was going to be smart and I was going to go light weights, but it's all the motion and moving. And buddy, yesterday I had to sit in the hot tub just to try to get my muscles to relax. So it was like plus 29 outside here Celsius. So whatever that is, Fahrenheit, I don't know, 90, 95. Yeah. So usually not hot tub weather, but in a week it'll feel great. But right now today, man, like it's a chore to get off a chair.
Yeah. I'm starting to get my life in order as well. Got through the holiday. I figured I'd relax a bit after, as you said, all that travel and try and get on a more normal human schedule. So this week started a 3-day cleanse. No solid foods, no food at all for 3 days, just juice and water. So I'm going to try and reset the body and see if I can make something of myself.
I've never went on one of those things. How is that?
It's actually really nice just because I've done it. I did one maybe like 6 years ago. And, just from eating, you're so inflamed, right? Like your gut's inflamed, everything's inflamed. It's just nice to kind of reset and kind of get back to normal. So it just gives everything a chance to sort of get back in sync.
Do you feel hungry all the time?
Yeah, I mean, you're hungry for sure, but you have depending on, whatever you get, you drink a juice you drink 6 every 2 hours. So 6 different juices over the course of the day, 1 every 2 hours.
Huh.
And then the rest of the time you're having water. You can mix in a black coffee if you want. But other than
just
that,
basically
no food.
Liquids, eh?
Yeah, liquid only for 3 days.
Wow, well, good for you. That's a negative for this cat. I get hangry way too quickly, so I need food. But I'm pretty strict on what we eat in our house. Well, my wife is, not me. Let's not kid ourselves. She does all the research, and there's so much crap in our food system nowadays, unfortunately. So
it's a shame.
Got to watch it. You have to watch it. Now, there was lots going on, Frank, Of course, we did our free agency preview on Sunday night, the 30th. And then it was absolute pandemonium on free agency day. An NHL record spent in over $1 billion in salaries. Now that the dust is settled and teams have had their weeks, which ones stand out to you, good and bad?
Well, I kind of lump the entire offseason period together, right? Like, it can't just be free agency week. If there's some trades involved, you have to include those too. There's a few teams that really stand out. One is the New Jersey Devils, solving their goaltending issue, getting Jacob Markstrom with Jake Allen. I think they're going to be well positioned for 82 games. You add some veteran presence and help to their blue line. I think they made significant upgrades, plus the much needed experience that those young guys got last year. Hugely important. Brett Pesce and Brendan Dillon, I think, are going to work wonders for that team.
Yes.
And a healthy Dougie Hamilton, which, by the way, his schedule video absolutely crushed. And then up front, just a bunch of really smart moves, like Stefan Nason coming back. I think he was a huge part of what the Carolina Hurricanes did. And, I understand their reasoning for not wanting to pay, hoping that you can go out and replace him. But still, Stefan Nason, really important piece. Paul Cotter, another important bottom six piece. I love what the Devils did during this offseason period.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. I like the fact, essentially, Frank, they're going to have 3 new defensemen. Like, Hamilton didn't play very much last year. So you put in Hamilton, and I'm kind of curious what their defense pairs are going to be. But Brendan Dillon is not only a really good defenseman, he's one of like the best humans going in the league. And his teammates love him. Nemec and Hughes. Not that Hughes needs a lot of protection the way he played last year, but anytime you get to have a veteran partner, it just helps you. I've talked to so many young guys. When you have a veteran, like, it's great to have a good defensive coach, but the veteran's on the ice, giving you little tips in the bench after shifts. Evan Bouchard's raved about Keith and Ekholm. When you go around the league, there's lots of guys who talk about what a difference it could make. And I think that's going to be the biggest benefactor. And, then you throw in Jonas Siegenthaler, like, their 60 there are really solid, right? Really solid. The other one, Thomas Tatar.
I think Seamus Casey's going to be really good.
Yeah, I don't know if he'll like Nemec, will play in Hughes and Siegenthaler and Dillon and Pesce and Hamilton. Like, they don't have to rush anybody else. Like, they don't need Seamus probably is going to spend another year in the minors, I would think, right? Like, you're not going to have 3 young guys on their back end. At least I thought that was their mistake last year. I think by who they signed, I think that shows they don't want to do that again. It's great on paper. It's good in theory. It's not good in practicality, is the way I look at it. And then Stefan Noson's really turned himself. Like, this was a guy who was in and out of the lineup, Frank, a few years ago, wasn't even a regular for the San Jose Sharks. And man, he's really turned his game around and found a stride. And, Thomas Tatar is a cheap veteran ad who can probably score you 15 goals on your third line and chip in if you get some injuries up in your top 6 at times. So, yeah, you mentioned Paul Cotter. Yeah, the Devils, like, if you look at it today, I think most people would be shocked if they don't have the Devils in as one of the playoff teams in the East next year.
I'm going to make you a bold prediction now. New Jersey Devils win the division next year.
Yeah, well, Carolina's definitely taken a step back here a little bit. They haven't replaced their defenseman that much. Like, they have, but it's a downgrade in my opinion. So, but it's always hard to count them out. But and the Rangers, that's okay. It's a bold prediction, so I don't mind it in early July. So I'll take it.
You know who else really got better in that division? The Washington Capitals.
Yes. Buddy, there's no team that made more moves than the Capitals here in the offseason. Oh my goodness. I'll give them credit. They're like, we're not rebuilding. We're going to try to retool on the fly. They lost guys. Well, they traded away Kuznetsov. They lost Backstrom due to career-ending injuries. They're getting older, but they brought in some guys who are legit NHL players. Now, you and I were kind of on the same page. I like the bet of Pierre-Luc Dubois. There's not many.
I'm not as, that's the only question mark I have. I'm not as sold on that. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying I didn't love the risk profile of what if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I guess if it doesn't work, I just look and say, like, what if it doesn't work? He scores you 60 points. Like, that's not terrible. Like, if you look at his 5-on-5 scoring in LA, it was kind of the same. It's just he didn't get any power play time. He'll get power play time in Washington. There's no question. So I think I won't be surprised at all if Dubois is at the low end, 60 points. I would put him at the low end. Granted, he's healthy at the low end. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's a 75-point player next year. I know that's still not great 8.5 value yet. But if he has 1 year like that, I think it'll kind of regain his confidence. Dubois and Ovechkin and Wilson and Dylan Strome. I like Connor McMichael. They kind of got a combination there with some of their young guys coming up, right? Mangiapane, I have to think is a player who's going to be desperate to prove himself. It's a final year of his contract, and I thought when he signed it, he was never going to really live up to it. But then you throw in Hendrix Lapierre. They've got some skill across their top 9 in Washington.
I love what they did on the back end. I thought that Jacob Chikrin trade was the move of the offseason. Someone's going to need to explain that to me from an Ottawa perspective. I don't understand it at all. And I've had a week to think about it, and I still can't wrap my brain around it. This is a guy that a couple years ago, though, a first and 2 seconds. Yeah. How Nick Jensen, like, I understand you're trading left shot for right shot and you're always going to be at a disadvantage, but that's the best deal you could make for Jacob Chikrin. There's no way that's the best deal they could possibly make.
I think they went out at Nick Jensen is a really good defender, Frank, and the Ottawa Senators have stunk defending. And so they might have over wagered on it. I think that's fair.
He's almost 8 years older.
Oh, hey, I don't disagree.
I don't understand. He's on hole 16 of his career. Jacob Chikrin's he's on hole 6.
Yeah.
I don't. Well, he hasn't even gotten to the halfway house yet.
Yeah,
like someone needs to explain this to me.
Well, I think it's also looking ahead. Chikrin's 1 year away from UFA. He's probably going to jump up to 7, 8, maybe, depending on how
7.5.
Yeah, like they just couldn't afford him either. I think it's a little bit of that, right?
But somebody else could have afforded him. Nick Jensen gotten for that echelon of defensemen.
Yeah, maybe not.
I don't understand it. I'm sorry. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay. So you're not loving Ottawa's offseason?
No. And look, let's finish off the Washington part of it, because you get Chikrin and then you go out and you sign one of his best friends in Brandon Duhaime. That's a pretty good enticement to try and keep Chikrin. Two Florida kids who played for the Junior Panthers growing up. I mean, that's pretty awesome. And a cool story. I was around the Chikrins and the Duhaimes in Stockholm when the Wild and the Sens were there, and two just super close friends that first started playing together when they were 8 years old in South Florida. Pretty cool to see them be reunited. So I love that part of it. And then we didn't even talk about Roy, who I was saying all along might be the signing of the summer, depending on his term and dollars. And it's certainly not cheap. But you mentioned Nick Jensen being a defender. And I love the way Nick Jensen absorbs the forecheck. Like, don't get me wrong. It's important to your team. But Matt Roy is the stud. He was the stud defender class. And the Caps got him too. Like, I think the Caps improved in almost every area. And when you take a look at where they're heading in net, I'm sure at some point there's going to be a Charlie Lindgren extension, but they're really well positioned, I think, for now and to kind of stretch into the future. I think the Caps added 10 plus points to their season total in the offseason.
Yeah, well, Lindgren, and then Logan Thompson's solid NHL goaltender. So look at his cap hit for this season. It's obviously quite a bit lower than Darcy Kemper's. So that I know that wasn't a direct trade, but you trade Kemper away to get Dubois, and then you add in Logan Thompson in that deal. I don't mind their offseason at all. I think in the East, Washington and New Jersey, now they're when you're a team that has room to grow, it is easier to improve, no question. But those two teams probably have improved the most in the East, I would say, in the offseason. Right? What do you make about the Tampa Bay Lightning and parting ways with Steven Stamkos?
I think it's a big mistake. I think it's a giant miscalculation by Julien Brisebois. And I think in the end, this is going to be a black eye on the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm not a big fan of doing deals for sentimentality. I would never advocate for that. I think the NHL, and I've said this for the test of time, the NHL needed to get away from paying players for what they already did and needs to pay players based on what they're going to do. I just have a really hard time making the argument, if you are the Tampa Bay Lightning, that 40 plus goal, 80 plus point Steven Stamkos from last season doesn't help your team, on top of being an icon and Mount Rushmore player that really wanted to stay. I truly believe that had the Lightning offered him 3 years times $6 million a year, that he would have taken it and stayed. They didn't get close to it. And he ended up getting 4 times 8 in Tennessee, which that's an impressive payday, but it was never about the money for him. It was about presenting a realistic offer to keep him in town. And the Lightning were never able to come to the table with something that made sense for them and for him, at least according to Brisebois. And I just think they're missing the forest through the trees. Like, I don't know how, and maybe you can walk me through it. Can you make the argument today that with McDonough and Gensel, they're in a better spot than with Stamkos and Sergachev?
No.
Can you do it?
No, I can't. The McDonough one originally, that's when that trade happened, Frank, right after the season, that's the one that had me going, what? Like, I never understood why you would make that deal for a guy.
If you're going to take him back, they needed Nashville to retain money.
Yeah. Like, obviously I think this was their plan, and they said, hey, we'll bring McDonough back. And I don't know what they see in McDonough, that, like, maybe they know something about Sergachev that we don't, Frank. I don't know. Maybe they think he's not going to be the same player. I don't understand it, but could Jake Gensel over the next 4 years outscore Steven Stamkos? Yeah, I think there's a legit chance about that, but there's no way that Ryan McDonough is doing the same thing, heck, over even the next 2 years. So yeah, that kind of trade, that 2 for 2, which is ultimately what it is for their lineup, was head. Now, obviously there's not even that difference, Frank. Like, what is it? 16 million for Sergachev and Stamkos at 8 million, and Gensel and Ryan McDonough are also are 15.75. Like, it's not like the cap space is much different.
Well, then now add in the collateral damage. Like, I love that Julien Brisebois is ruthless. I do. Like, I think more of that's needed in today's NHL. I just think this is a big miscalculation. I think there's reputational harm and damage done to their brand. I think there's damage done to their locker room. I'm not overstating it, but Victor Hedman signs the same exact extension as Steven Stamkos. And by the way, there's been bigger decline in Victor Hedman's game than there has been in Steven Stamkos's game, if we're all being honest. And he opens his press conference and can only talk about Stamkos. Like, these guys have won together multiple times, have a tight bond. And yeah, all championship teams get broken up at some point. This just felt like an unforced error.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, hey, Hedman was almost a point a game defenseman, man. He had
But
76.
the defensive side of his game fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
That's what the numbers would indicate. I mean, yeah, offensively, he had his best season that he had in years, but defensively, he wasn't close.
Yeah, well, their defensive game, I think, and I wonder how much of that early on in the season maybe was a little bit of goaltending. We'll see. I guess we'll find out at the when Vasilevsky's ready to roll from the start of the season. But like Tampa Bay, do you think they've like, even though it's Gensel and McDonough, like I see some people thinking, oh, Tampa Bay is really going to fall. I'm like, I don't know if they're going to fall that much. Do you?
I don't know that they're going to fall that much, but I think this just further cemented them in mediocrity. I don't think they got any better.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Maybe they're going to be better because you're going to have a normal offseason of training from Vasilevsky and he hits the ground running. You know, you're not trying to get through 20 games with Johansson. Maybe like that maybe is part of their path to get back, but I don't think they improved. And to take the hit along with not improving, that really hurts.
Anybody else stand out in the East? Then we'll go to the West.
In terms of off seasons that I didn't like?
Yeah, didn't or did?
Still not entirely sure what the New York Islanders are doing.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of, isn't it like you look at their lineup, Frank, they haven't changed much, honestly. Like you bring in Anthony Duclair, right? On could be a decent deal at 3.5, but other than that, they didn't do anything.
You know who else didn't really do anything? And maybe a segue into the West is the team shirt you're wearing. I know you've got the Tage Thompson fan club, but this was supposed to be an aggressive summer for the Buffalo Sabres. I can't look at the Sabres team now and say that they're any better now than they were when they ended the season. Zucker, 1 year, $5 million. The Ryan McLeod trade, which we'll touch on. Nick Aube-Kubel, $1.5 million. Sam Lafferty, $2 million. I mean, you improved your bottom six, but you finished 23rd in the league in goals, and you felt the need to buy out Jeff Skinner, who scored you 25. Between Zucker, well, I guess McLeod could get you a chunk of those, but Lafferty, Aube-Kubel, and Zucker might get you 25 together.
Yeah, well,
I did like the Beck Mallenstein deal. I think.
Yeah. Well, they changed their whole bottom six basically. Right, their entire bottom six is revamped.
But
we'll see if it works.
So, that was going to be my question. The bottom six is retooled, but when you watch the Sabres play, was the bottom six what was like? To me, the bottom six is sometimes what holds championship caliber teams back from going from strong playoff team to Stanley Cup contender. I never looked at the Buffalo Sabres and said the reason they're not in the playoffs is because their bottom six isn't any good.
No, they couldn't score this year. That was their biggest issue, right? Like I love their top four defense, like a lot. I really like it, but you look at up front, like they didn't have terrible production from their bottom, but they didn't have a lot of production from their bottom. So like Victor Olofsson obviously had a terrible year. They had a post, so then they moved him, and he had 8 goals in 60 games. We saw what he was in Florida. Tyson Yost, who I'm trying to think who else they had. But
it's all going to be on JJ Peterka and Krebs and Jack Quinn and
Zach
Benson. Like it's going to be on all those guys to do it collectively. And that part is exciting if you're a Sabres fan, because there is a lot of talent there. And that top 4 defense I think that top 4 defense is as good or better than any in the entire league. I'd put that top 4 up against any team's top 4.
It's very close. Yeah. The only thing they lack is experience, but yeah, they've got a lot like Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power's just getting better.
How do they lack experience though? Dahlin's almost played 500 games. Owen Power is almost 200 games into his career. Bowen Byram, same thing, 164 games.
Yeah. I
I don't
look, if
know.
you look at like the top, don't get me wrong. I think Buffalo
Collectively, their top 4 is well over 1,000 games. Like it can't be considered young anymore. And that's kind of the lesson for the whole Sabres organization. The rebuild of the rebuild and everything else that comes with it. It can't be considered young anymore.
Well, let's get to the trade, Frank. The Ryan McLeod trade with Tullio for the 9th overall pick 2 years ago in Matt Savoie, who averaged, by the way, 2 points a game in junior this past year. He had 71 points in 34 games, split between Wenatchee and Moose Jaw, where they won the WHL title in the playoffs, and he was a key part of it. So fun trivia for you, Frank. In the salary cap era, since 2006, how many top 10 draft picks didn't play a single game for the team who drafted them? They got traded.
Since what year?
Since 2006. I'll give you a hint. There's 4 players who played fewer than 10 games for the team who drafted them and then got traded. So, you kind of get called up late in the year or whatever. So, and one of them was at 0, one's at 1, one was at 4, and one was at 8.
2?
No, there's 4 of them.
Oh, so but I'm saying who never played a game. There's only one?
Only one. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the one is Cutter Gauthier.
Okay.
Right. Got traded to the Ducks, also from the 2022 draft. Matt Savoie played 1 game for the Sabres, got traded for Ryan McLeod. Sergachev played 4 games for Montreal, then got traded in that summer afterwards for Drouin. And Griffin Reinhart played 8 games and then got traded. Obviously, Oiler fans know that. Now, that one was traded for draft picks, right? Mm-hmm. Sergachev was traded for a player. Ryan McLeod, of course, a player. And then you look at the Cutter Gauthier trade that happened earlier this season, right? For Jamie Drysdale. So it's extremely rare, is what I'm saying, is for a team to move a pick that quickly before he really plays for them. And a guy who had 2 points a game in junior, I look at this trade as Kevin Adams says, hey, Ryan McLeod's a bona fide NHL player. He's one of the fastest players in the game. He's really good at transporting the puck. He's a good penalty killer. His analytics are good. He doesn't get outscored, even away from McDavid and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins. He's a guy who played most of his minutes away from those players. And so he's a serviceable NHL player. And I look at Buffalo and I see a GM who's like, we got to make the playoffs, Frank. We got to compete for the playoffs. So he brings in a player who thinks maybe can even bring him a little bit more there than he had chances wise in Edmonton. That remains to be seen because, by the way, Ryan McLeod's never been a scorer. He's never been a scorer in junior. That's not his MO. So if you think Ryan McLeod's going to be a scorer, you're going to be disappointed. He can contribute. He might be able to get you 15, which is fine. Maybe 1 year he has a 20-goal season. Lots of guys do that.
Yeah, but I'd say he could probably get close to 20.
15, we'll see. I guess it depends if he gets a little extra power play time, possibly. But he was never been a big scorer. Like if you're not a finisher in junior, it's hard to be a finisher in the NHL is all I'm saying. And so Matty Savoie becomes the player, Frank, they got a lot of small forwards, like guys who just recently were all drafted, right? Zach Benson. You look at Austin, you look at Savoie, and you look at Isaac. I think that's in 21, 22, 23, all drafted. They're all like 5'9" to 5'11", small skilled forwards. And they ended up giving up Savoie. And, we'll see how this one works. It's a little bit of a salary cap dump too for Edmonton because they're technically over the cap right now. So there's that.
Not only that, but when you look at their lineup, it was hard to really squint and find a place that McLeod makes sense. He was just being pushed further down, right?
Yes.
And the optionality to play center is important or was important, but I guess I kind of arrive at the same point with this deal as I do with the Chychrun trade, which is let's just say hypothetically the Sabres really want McLeod. Is trading Savoie the only way they could have gotten there? Like I would sit back and say, wait it out. they're only going to be in a worse position once they sign Broberg and once they're going to have to do something.
Holloway.
Yeah. What,
Yeah.
Smoke them out. There was no need to do that deal on July 3rd or 2nd, whatever it ended up being. Same thing with the Chychrun deal. Like, we knew that they couldn't possibly go down a path where they would extend him in Ottawa, because you can't commit $24 million to just the left side of your defense. It'd be in that neighborhood with those two other guys in Sanderson and Shabbat. Is like, I totally get from a Caps perspective, we want Jacob Chychrun, but
you didn't
Nick
have room
Jensen,
for Nick
all
Jensen.
that this, like, couldn't you have gone about this another way? Like, could you have used your powers, if you're the Sabres, to move Matt Savoie for capital that you can then trade to Edmonton, so that it's not straight up, like, and you end up netting out a win?
Yeah, who knows?
Couldn't the Sens have made a different deal? Is Nick Jensen the best you could have gotten?
Yeah, well, obviously at the time that's what they felt, right? I'm assuming you uncover all rocks, although history's told us that isn't always the case. Ask Bruins fans about the Joe Thornton trade.
I could just tell you, look at the Jake Wallman trade. I can tell you that teams just make deals sometimes without consulting with everyone else. The Jake Wallman trade, there were teams that are in a position to take on a bad contract that were shocked that a second round pick got attached to the Jake Wallman deal. Sometimes our assumptions are incorrect that the entire league has been canvassed. Everyone knew Jacob Chychrun was available. He's been on my trade targets board, it feels like, for the last 3 consecutive years.
So doesn't that kind of tell you that maybe that's the best they could get?
No, it still doesn't. He just went for a first and 2 seconds. I'm sorry. There's no way you go to a team and for a calendar year plus, you play better hockey and then get traded for Nick Jensen. I'm sorry. No.
Yeah. If you look at so the overall, you view the Savoie trade as a big win for Edmonton then?
I mean, I do think there's a part of course, the Oiler fan base and the whole league that probably overrates Savoie. Like, no one would know him better than the Sabres, right? They've seen him up close and personal. Either this is as lopsided as we think it is, or Savoie is going to need more time.
Well, he's not going to play in the. I fully expect him to go to the American League this year. Like, he's got to get stronger. There's no room. There wasn't room for Ryan McLeod, who's a proven NHL player. The only way Matty Savoie, I think, comes up, Frank, is if Edmonton has an injury to a right winger after 30, 40 game mark. I fully expect Savoie to be on the first unit power play, first line in the American League to start the year.
Well, and the fact that he's from Edmonton, like, it's chef's kiss. Like, it's the Oilers probably had to unload McLeod. Let's not forget that McLeod was a healthy scratch during the playoffs.
One game, yeah.
I think his game is incredibly frustrating to watch. I think he's got all of the physical gifts and tools, and I think he's a player that at times doesn't engage enough with physicality, and at times makes careless plays. That he could be something really special, McLeod. He could be the perfect sort of modern day 2024 player with his speed, but he's an imperfect player. And most players are, to be honest. It's just, this is a great deal for Edmonton in the time and place, with their roster where it is, with the cap situation, with the other end of it being the total upside of Savoie. It's still a tough deal to wrap my head around.
So they also get Skinner for 1 year at $3 million. They get Arvidsson for 2 years at $4 million. Did Edmonton, in your view, have the best West free agency / trade week?
Well, Utah was pretty good. I would say it's between Utah and Edmonton. Although I really liked what Chicago did.
What about Nashville?
I mean, Nashville was tremendous. I put Nashville in the Captain Obvious category because they swept the top 3 players on my top 75 heading into free agent day. So when you knock out Stamkos, Marchessault, and Brady Shea, it's kind of hard to argue that you didn't absolutely murder free agent day.
I think Brady Shea's he's a really good defender. No, it's pretty expensive, 7 years at or $7 million for him, pretty big cap hit for them. But it
was right in the range of what AFP Analytics told us it would be. It wasn't like out. It's not like they drastically overpaid. So, but if you're talking about an Edmonton team that was right there, I think the Oilers got better. I think Edmonton has their best top 6 since the 1980s. I love Victor Arvidsson.
Yeah, well, he'll play with Draisaitl, I think, for sure. And then so your 2 right wingers are pretty much set, Hyman and Arvidsson. And then, we'll see Nugent Hopkins and Skinner. I could see them flopping at times on those top 2 lines. And Dylan Holloway might move in there for a little bit.
What's going on with Evander Kane?
So here's what I think is going to happen with Evander Kane, Frank. I think they're going to go down the road with a lot of players try. They're going to go with the rest rehab first. And because, it was interesting. Jeff Jackson used the word hip, which we hadn't heard, right? We'd heard about the sports hernia, which is really correctly called athletic pubalgia, which is what it is, which can lead to hip issues, right? It can all be intertwined. But, it's a fact that the word hip came out of the CEO's mouth. That was the first time we'd really heard that. And so to me, hip's a little bit different. I understand that you're going to try, as every player would. I think there's too often people think that just, do surgery. There's still risks in surgery. It doesn't always work the way you want it to be. And so if you can rehab it without it, that's what I think they're going to try. Here's my guess. I think they're going to try it, Frank, and they're going to realize it doesn't work. And then he's going to end up having surgery. That's my guess.
So is he game 1? Is Evander Kane in the lineup?
My hunch says no.
Game 75 is Evander Kane in the lineup.
Guess it depends what the surgery is, right?
Are the Oilers just trying to get rid of him, or is he authentically hurt?
Well, I think both can happen at the same time. I think would the Oilers look to move Evander Kane? I think that's a very fair comment. I also think he's hurt. So I think the number one thing they want is, and they got to get Kane healthy. And if you're Evander Kane, you got to get healthy, right? Like Kane wants to sign another contract when these 2-year deal's up, but he was banged up the previous year. He was banged up this past season. Right now, the previous one was unlucky and awful with the wrist injury, right? So that's just, you can't really prepare for that. But I look at Kane, and I remember a veteran telling me many years ago, Frank, and this line always stood with me. You can't cheat the game when you get older. And he was talking about, there's so many guys who are just naturally, unbelievably gifted athletes, which I think that's what Kane is. Kane's one of those just ridiculously naturally gifted specimens. As you get older, if you don't incorporate the best training practices, your body starts to let you down because you can't cheat the game. And, Kane, I think, is a guy who can be, I think he can maximize his conditioning more and everything and give himself a better chance. He also, I'll give him credit, he plays through injuries, right? He obviously was banged up at times through the year. Lots of guys are, but he was. So he needs to get healthy first. And so I think they'll try it, Frank. But the problem is you have a short off season. So you're going to try rest and rehab, but then you got to ramp it up again to get back into shape. And I'm not sure there's enough time to do both. So that's why I expect they'll try rest and rehab. Hopefully it works for him, but right now my gut says no. Now, if it does, then I think they're going to trade someone else. Like Kane has a full no movement clause. He looks around the room and is like, I'll stay here. We're pretty good. Now, come March 1st, Frank, that changes to a 16-team trade list. So that's all of a sudden half the league you can trade him to. So, and he's got a year and a half left.
That's really rare to have the no trade open in time for the deadline, by the way. Yeah. Usually it happens in the summer.
Yes.
I don't like injury aside, I don't know. Does he have a lot of trade value? Like if you were to
he's
just
got to
look
show
at,
he can play again. Yes, he's got to
if you
show he
were
can
to
be
just
healthy.
look on paper, like he scored the most goals last year of any season that he's had since 2019-20, but he had a couple shortened years there where he obviously produced at a way higher pace. There were just so many nights last year, and I can't indicate how healthy he was during the entire season, but there were so many nights where he just was absent in the lineup, but not doing anything. And so I think he really probably has to get back playing and healthy for the Oilers to even have a viable trade option.
I still think he has value because you look like he scored 24 goals last year. He still was right up there. He's a physical player. He had 22 goals in 43 games. He had 22 goals in 56. Like there's not many guys who's like that. Those are 30 goal paces, right? On a full season.
He's still a pain in the ass. He's still a Vander Kane. He didn't just wake up all of a sudden in Edmonton and be a different person. I can assure you.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, I don't disagree that, but you know, Kane has, you haven't had the outwardly issues, although I still felt it odd when he was healthy scratch and his coach gave him a lifeline. He's like, no, I'm healthy. Or he said, I'm not hurt. When the coach said he was hurt to try to protect him. That was odd to me, but whatever.
The whole thing's been odd. And then his body language throughout the Stanley Cup final was terrible. He was clearly moping during morning skates as a placeholder. Like just, there wasn't really a lot to like about it. It was, he wanted everyone to know exactly what he was feeling without saying anything. Yeah. And I just think that drives guys crazy.
Yeah. It's kind of who he is. So, I would say if I had to bet today, and I hope I'm wrong because you never want a player to be injured, but if the injuries is as bad as, you know, as they said, and he's been dealing with it all the time, and sometimes it can be cured just from rest and rehab, Frank. Scientifically, they say it can. All depends on the severity. I just think the short runway is the hardest part for them, right? Because it's not like Kane can take the whole summer off and then start trying to skate, you know, September 1st with training camp. You know, I guess you could, but then you're behind the 8 ball again, right? And then you come to camp, and then of course you go 100%, and boom, what happens? You're not conditioned well enough, and then you get injured. So I think they're going to try to rest and rehab, and then probably have to push it in August to see where they're at.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, and then if they have to move another player, then Cody Ceci would probably be the most likely guy.
I don't think they really keyed into that just yet, is my understanding.
No,
but
I'm
telling you,
is viewed
if I were another
team,
I'd be trying to offer sheet Philip Broberg.
How much though?
I'd give him 6 years times $4.5 million.
Well, I have to look at which teams could do that first of all.
A ton.
Right?
So you get a young defenseman who already let you know that he was unhappy with his opportunity, should have probably made the case in the playoffs that he should have been playing all year with the way that he played. Now is an important part of your team moving forward, and they don't have the ability to keep him if they get an offer sheet. There's really no chance to even match that. The surgery you'd have to do to make that happen, it would involve like Kane LTIR,
CC being moved. That's it.
But that's Kane lock and key not coming off of LTIR.
Yeah. Well, that's why when they said hip, Frank, that's where my spidey sense, a hip surgery is a much bigger deal, if indeed, depending on the severity of it, right? Like hips just take a lot longer. So the one thing Broberg did say was he was a firm believer that him going to the American League changed everything for him because he got to play a significant amount of minutes. For basically 2 years, he didn't play a lot of games. And now you can argue that the mistake was made not playing him beforehand, right? The egg and the chicken, whatever's coming first, the ice time, opportunity, yada, yada, yada. But offer sheets are, they're interesting. I never liked the Kotkaniemi one from the get-go, and it hasn't worked out at all, despite people trying to tell me numerous times, oh, no, he's a $4.9 million player. Look at that contract. It has never worked out for Carolina, ever. Ever. They've got no value for that deal. Never once. It was strictly out of spite that Montreal offer sheeted Aho, right? Didn't make any sense then. So offer sheets are, I see what you're saying. You could probably place a long wager on it that he could play into that player for sure.
How much does he really need to be a $4.5 million defenseman?
Yeah,
Like you're talking a number 4. Can Philip Broberg is he already a number 4?
Yeah, no, I understand you, but the teams that do it, Frank, some of those teams are rebuilt. Like Calgary has a boatload of cap space, right? Like they could easily do it if you look at the amount of cap space.
There's a million teams that could do it.
Yeah. But I think a lot of them are like, well, we're in a rebuild. Does that, in a way, it probably does help you rebuild because he's a young player that, you have boatload of cap space, right? Like the Anaheim Ducks. Are you telling me they couldn't do it? Right. Now Detroit doesn't have as much cap space as it looks like today because they still got to sign Sider and Raymond. So I would take them out of it. But Calgary and Anaheim definitely could do it if they wanted to. Those are the two teams. Now, you surprised?
Utah, Utah, Columbus, like Anaheim. Like if I'm the Ducks, I'm all over that. I'm hurting another team in my division. I get another young player who fits my age scheme, and I'm Pat Verbeek, and I give no bleeps about anyone else.
Yeah. I think Edmonton would match the offer sheet, though, if it was 4.5.
Okay. All I'm saying is you're going to force them into a really difficult position, which is the entire point, which is let's not play nice in the sandbox. These are our rivals and competitors. I've never understood that about the NHL.
Well, I think teams don't do it because they worry about, well, when I'm in that situation, I don't want people to do it to me. That's why I think that's a big reason why we don't.
Well, then get your business done to the point where they don't make it to July 1st. That is completely within your control to handle.
It's totally fair. Yeah, I understand it. Like it would be better chaos for the summertime. There's no question about it. If offer sheets became more of a legit thing, for sure, you could do it. Now, before we get to Ty, quickly, what about the Ducks, Frank? They were like the quietest team out there with all the space.
They weren't the quietest. They made larger and more lucrative offers to both Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault. More term and more dollars.
Yeah. Well, I guess in getting
both players just weren't ready for that. That's okay. But I'm not going to sit here and criticize the Ducks. A lot of people were making fun of them, saying how disappointing it was that they didn't get the top 6 forward and top 4 defender that they were looking for. Sometimes you got to take they took the bat off their shoulder. They swung. Even the best hitters strike out.
Yeah, and it shows people that players, when they have a choice, and money's not that different at that point, they'll pick a more competitive team. Just a fact, right? It's not so much geography. It's not so much state tax. Because, by the way, the one thing, and I hear it in NHL circles all the time. Oh, look at the state tax advantage. You never hear it in the NFL. You never hear it in the NBA. You never hear it in Major League Baseball. It's only in the NHL. It's like this repeated thing that I think is the most overrated thing, but nonetheless. Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk.
What's up, boys? Back with a fresh edition of Buy or Sell, brought to you by Bet365. I'm going to have a Bet365 themed question coming up in a little bit, but let's continue the Western Conference talk really quick. Let's go from Edmonton down to Calgary. I'm going to say the Flames will be a bottom 5 team next year. Frank, are they bottoming out that hard in Calgary? No one has more cap space right now than the Flames.
I don't think so. I would say Columbus, San Jose. Yeah, I don't know. They're going to be in the conversation. I can't rule it out of hand.
More likely,
but I still don't think I think with the upper echelon players that they have, it's going to be really hard for them to be as bad as the teams that are in that sort of swimming at those depths, if that makes sense.
Jay, where do you come out on the Flames?
Yeah. Bottom 5 is tough because where was Calgary last year? They were, I guess they were what, 10th? So to drop 5, like New Jersey was tied with them. They're going up. Seattle was tied with them. I think they're better now. Utah, I think we'd all agree is better. So yeah, but San Jose, Chicago, Anaheim.
They were 5 points ahead of the bottom 5.
Yeah. So my biggest question in Calgary is goaltending. Honestly, I understand he's been very good, and we'll see Dan Vladar and Dustin Wolf. That to me is the big question mark. Is Wolf going to be the guy that they're all hoping he can be? He's been a dominant AHL goalie for 2 years, like dominant, right? Like we haven't seen a guy put up numbers like that in the American League for a long time. So can that come over to the NHL? That to me is the question. And if it doesn't right away, which won't surprise me because lots of young goalies, it takes time, man. It is the one position. There's so few players under the age of 25 who are consistent goaltenders. Go through the list of guys, man, and find our under 25 guy mentally as much as physically. So that to me is the big question mark in Calgary. Because if they don't get goaltending, then yeah, I think they're a legit bottom 5 team. And that might not be the worst thing for them. They could probably use a top pick. I don't think the Flames have ever had a number 1 overall pick, if I'm not mistaken.
They have not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, no worse spot to be than that old, no worse than 8th overall and no better than the 8th seed kind of thing. All right, next one, staying out west. You guys talked a lot about the East earlier on and maybe some teams who will end up regretting what they did in free agency. I'm going to take it a different direction for the West. I'm actually going to say the Seattle Kraken. In hindsight, however many years it is, they'll be the team that regrets what they did in free agency the most. They gave out 2 real long-term contracts to 2 guys who are second line forward and a second pairing D-man who are both 30 years old. Buy or sell on the Kraken one day regretting the money they dished out. Gregor, you're up first on this one.
Well, there's currently $55 million in buyouts, dead cap space across the NHL. I don't know what the cap will be in 4.5 years to make it. But do I think those guys are going to give them $13 million of good value past the first 3 years? I think it's going to be tough. So maybe I'm wrong. We're seeing players play better into their 30s now than ever before. But I think the bare minimum, the last 2 years of those deals could be tough. But I understand why they did it. There was a lot of pressure in Seattle. They had to improve. Chandler Stevenson's a solid player. And at $6 million, like if he just stays at a 60-point player, guys, then he's kind of worth his contract. If you go by the 10 points for $1 million kind of adage for offensive guys, right? I think Brandon Montour will come in and help them a lot. He's flashy. He skates really well. They got some huge guys in Larson and Alexiak. So then you put in Dunn and Montour. I don't mind the mix. I'm kind of surprised. Like I look at their third pair in Seattle and I'm like, you spent all this money, but like your third pairs, they probably want to upgrade there. But I'll say year 3, the first 3 years, they're fine. After that, it's questionable.
I'll buy. I'm with you, Ty. I saw Larry Brooks write this in the New York Post, and I've been using it since. The first rule of free agency, if you're a GM, is do no harm. I think the Kraken are cracking under the pressure. I think they felt like their second year as a franchise was the worst thing that could have happened to them. They got a taste of the playoffs. They had success. Third year, they regressed to what they probably should have actually been the whole time. And all of a sudden, is everything trending in the right direction? Are we getting the market buy-in that we need? Are ticket sales holding steady? I'm told they're not. Ownership starts to get antsy. You start to do things that you probably shouldn't. And I think they're a team that they need difference makers. And I really like Chandler Stevenson and I like Brandon Montour. I'm just not sure they're drivers. And you need drivers is what you need to add.
All right, last one I got for you guys. Let's go out east. Our friends at Bet365 have Stanley Cup odds up for next season already. No surprise, the Oilers are the favorites in the West. They're actually the only team that's 8-1 or better. So Edmonton's number 1 overall. I want to ask you guys, who would you have as the favorites in the Eastern Conference? Frank?
The East, man, I know there's a ton of recency bias here. First off, I don't think the Florida Panthers are going anywhere. So you got the Panthers, Rangers, Canes. I know it's a huge improvement based on where they were. Like the fact that the Devils weren't even in the conversation to get that 8th seed that was a pillow fight last year is crazy. I just think they improved that much, and with a healthy Dougie Hamilton and with experience on their back end for their young guys now, they're not rookies anymore. I'm putting the Devils in that category, and I'd say if I had to pick one today, I know people didn't love their offseason, but I'm going to have a hard time straying from the Rangers.
Fair. Greg's, who would you have as the favorite out East?
Frankie loves his Devils. Yeah, the Rangers were the team I was gonna go with, and I'll stick with them. I'll say though, I don't think there's as clear of a favorite. Now, favorite on paper is just on paper, but I think most people would look and say, hey, Edmonton's a favorite in the West for sure. Doesn't mean they will be. Colorado's the ultimate wild card for me out West, but I will say I'll go with the Rangers in the East as the top team. The other team that I don't sleep on, the Boston Bruins, man. That would be my.
Did they get better?
Finally got center depth.
Yeah, they got. I you know what it is? I don't know what it is about Boston. Guys go there and they play better, Frank. I think Elias Lindholm is going to get back, and he is going to. I think he's going to have a much better season in Boston. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've seen lots of guys go to Boston, and all of a sudden they play way better. They've got a really good winning culture where they play well, but they demand lots of each other, and then they seem to be very cohesive.
Frank loves his Devils, and
might
so
just
do
want to start by getting Jeremy Swayman on.
Oh, the Swayman situation.
I was gonna say might just want to start by getting, get that done.
All right. Well, maybe you guys can pick that up after, but just wanted to wrap up and say the Devils, according to Bet365, are the favorites in the East at plus 900. They are right behind Edmonton on the Stanley Cup odds, and it's Florida and Dallas at 10-1. Colorado and Carolina are tied for the 5th spot at 11-1. Rangers would be the 3rd team, 13-1 for you, Greg's. Bruins are 18-1. So there you go. You can get in on a huge range of markets with our friends at Bet365 and use that promo code DAILY365. And that is a wrap on this week's edition of Buy or Sell.
Yeah, the Colorado Avalanche, Frank, to me, are the most they're the most interesting team in the league just because of the uncertainty of Landeskog and Nichushkin and where they're going to be at when the season begins. And because let's say their worst case scenario, Frank, that's a major blow to the Avs. Best case scenario, they're both back. That's a pretty big win.
Well, Nichushkin isn't eligible to come back until November 15th.
Yeah.
Landeskog, I believe, is trending towards game 1. That's what he's ramping up for. But it's not unprecedented because Sean Couturier came back.
Yes.
But it's bordering on unprecedented, the amount of time that he's missed. 2 full seasons.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe he's the guy who just shows you, hey, you need the proper amount of rest. Don't rush it back. You got to take your time. But
to get back to that level, though, it's going to be hard.
Yes. Oh, dude, it's going to be very hard. But you know what? He was never a flashy player, Frank. And I don't mean that as a negative, that, it might be, he wasn't like he just blew by guys, right? Strong, I think his strength will be there, of course, but it's really going to be his mobility, right? Like that. Can you move in tight spaces? And that's going to be the question. But I find myself very much rooting for it. It's hard not to cheer for the underdog. And I know that Landeskog's a Stanley Cup winner and, he's a 2nd overall pick and he's been a really good player's career, but coming back from this, I view him as a significant underdog. And so I'm rooting for him.
How could you not? In the meantime, the Avs are dealing with some cap chaos on how to manage it because you've got to reserve the space to be able to activate Nichushkin. You've got to reserve the space to be able to activate Landeskog from game 1 even if he's not back until game 20.
Mhm.
It's really
Yes.
not an easy place to be in.
No, and because it's not like if they aren't ready, that there's guys you can just go out there and fill the holes with, right? That's the
Well, you could fill the hole, but how do you offload them after when they're ready? You can't. You can't even fill the hole. You've
Well,
got
if
to use minor league players.
yeah, like if Landeskog's not ready at some point, at some point it's like, okay, I try it and it's done, right? Like if he comes back and does training camp, and
That's
it's
the
like,
worst case scenario, because then you could have spent that money this summer that you didn't get to, and now you're
know,
left
that's
with
my
a
point,
hole that you
yes.
can't fill.
I agree. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the worst. That's why they're really kind of in limbo in a way. They're in limbo because they've got to juggle we might have the 13 million.
We should send a message to Chris McFarland. Blink twice if you would like to be freed from your hostage, or if your keepers can free you. Blink twice. Like that, he's being held hostage right now. That's really the crux of the situation for the Colorado Avalanche.
Yeah, it's like $13.1 million that you have to keep free just in case. And then you can't if they go on LTIR, well, that's great, but doesn't help them at all because there's nobody out there, I guess, unless they're going to trade, but then you got to give up other assets. Like, yeah, it's a real
And they don't have a ton of assets. Like they already
No.
traded their first round pick in the Sean Walker deal. Like it's not great.
Yeah, that Walker trade didn't end up being as great as some people suggested it would be for them. Because it's a first for a guy who became a rental and signed for less than $4 million.
Yeah.
So tough one. Frankie, have yourself a good week. Go back to being your GC, and we will chat with you. That's the rundown brought to you by Bet365. Use the promo code DAILY365 to set up an account. Get in on everything you can. If you like soccer, the Olympics are coming up. You want to get in on NHL for next year, who you think maybe is going to lead the league in scoring, who's going to win each division. You got it all at Bet365.